It's got to stop.
What's life like homeless? It's hard. I'd rather be indoors. It's harder. And once you get in this situation, it's harder to get out of it.
I've been out here for 5 years. You know, it's rough.
I've been homeless here for 6 years.
I learned how to dumpster dive for food, originally over on Venice Beach when I was 12 years old.
I just want to be treated normal. That's it.
Homelessness is by far the single biggest issue in Los Angeles right now.
This issue has now been embedded as part of the LA brand, where in the ways that we think about Los Angeles as being a place with sunshine and traffic, that homelessness is now one of the parts of living here, regardless of where you live.
It is everywhere. Homelessness in LA is everywhere. There's not a neighborhood that hasn't seen it. There's not an overpass that doesn't have it. There's not a park that hasn't experienced it. It's everywhere.
The situation is more urgent than ever before. The problem has grown to be visible in every single neighborhood in Los Angeles.
It's near our schools, near our work, near our parks. It really affects everybody.
We've all seen the homeless in our neighborhoods, onto the freeways, in downtown Los Angeles, right outside City Hall, which continues to astonish me that our elected leaders can walk downstairs to the street outside their offices and see people in tents, and they've been there for years and they're still there.
Homelessness in LA, after the 37 years that I've been directly involved with it, is worse now than ever before. After billions, literally billions of dollars spent just locally via the well-meaning social services, homelessness has increased in numbers, in complexities.
The homeless count is an imperfect science, and it gives us kind of a baseline to work off of. I believe there probably are more individuals that are on our streets that are invisible because they don't want to be seen.
You feel safe out here?
No. You never feel safe. You never... You always have to sleep with one eye open.
It's in pretty dire straits. Unfortunately, Los Angeles is one of those cases where we're seeing our rates increase at a level that's more than any other metropolitan area.
It is a humanitarian crisis when you're allowing people to sleep on the sidewalk. It's just not humane.
Imagine being haunted by homelessness and living in LA, where we are the capital of homelessness, and we have 70,000 people suffering on the streets. I'm more heartbroken than mad, more going to bed at night knowing that we're losing 4.5 precious human beings, our most valuable resource, every day to complications of homelessness.
Year upon year, the number of people who die every day on our streets gets worse. It is unconscionable, it is an emergency, and it's a humanitarian disaster.
It's mushroomed into an epidemic, and it reached crisis levels because now the homeless encampments are encroaching and destroying the business community, the tourism industry, impacting the quality of life of our residential areas, contributing to the rise in violent crime and just overall misery, while the homeless are dying in record numbers. So we have the worst of everything possible is what we have today.
As a lifelong Angelino and someone who's born and raised in the Pasadena area, just even watching it in my own community, it makes me sick. That could be my sister, my brother, my mother, my father. And yet, we all turn a blind eye. There was a time when if someone were laying on a street corner not moving, someone would call 911. Now you'll see people just walk by as though it's an everyday occurrence, because it is.
This is happening in America. We talk about how we're this shining example of democracy, and there's a human rights crisis happening right under our noses. Our fellow man is living in conditions equal to a third world poverty.
The people are very angry at living this way. This is no way to live. And it crosses every possible demographic. There is no partisan split on this whatsoever. If there is a guy defecating in your kid's park, nothing else matters than getting that guy out of the park.
It's a moral crisis. It is a public health crisis. We also know it is a public safety crisis. And by the way, it's an economic crisis as well, because it really calls into question for a lot of people whether LA is the place that they want to invest, whether it's the place that they want to book their vacation. And that is going to extract an economic toll. And by the way, if it extracts an economic toll, that also means we have less revenues to deal with these problems.
Who wants to be known for homelessness? But that's the reality. I mean, you talk to people who visit from out of town, they're stunned, shocked. I mean, that these conditions exist on the streets of the second largest city in the country.
I really love living in Los Angeles. And I can't believe I'm looking back at 2015 with nostalgia. You know, when my wife and I could take a walk through anywhere, downtown LA, through Brentwood, and not have your head on a swivel looking around. I mean, yes, I want those days back. Most people pay a lot of money in taxes, a lot of money. This is not part of the deal. And then they try to lay this guilt, oh, you're not being compassionate, you're not. I only have an expletive in return for that.
I love this city. I have deep affection for her, and I love how beautiful it is. Does the blight and the trash and the garbage upset me? Sure it does. It worries me. It's not safe, but that's not my primary concern. My primary concern is what led to this problem? What led to it, and why is it being allowed to continue?
It's really hard, especially with not being able to get around very easily. That's my wheelchair right there. I need a new hip. So it's kind of taking its toll. Can't move around, so gain more weight. not easy. Most people don't understand that it's, I mean, little things. Wanting to go use the bathroom somewhere and they don't let you. Doctors won't help. Do everything you can to avoid homelessness.
This isn't just a point in time now that we are addressing. This has been a part of American society, a part of Los Angeles, a part of California since its very beginning. Los Angeles during that time period was a place where young white men would come to find work. You had single room occupancy hotels, you had bars, and so like the early Skid Row of Los Angeles, it's kind of the story of young downtown Los Angeles, of young people coming in, trying to find their way, and then moving on to their next location. Now, Skid Row becomes the Skid Row that we know of it in the 1940s and 1950s when that population begins to stay.
If you haven't been to the Skid Row area, it's horrifying. It's heartbreaking. An area of 50+ blocks in downtown LA where the services were all in place there. The shelters were all in place.
So in the 1970s, you see this explosion of all of these services in these communities. And the communities responded by saying, we don't want these services in our communities. We want them somewhere else. And that somewhere else became Skid Row.
For a long time, the solution to homelessness was to contain it, as opposed to trying to come up with actual solutions. It was basically, if they're out of sight, out of mind kind of approach.
There was a very distinct border of who was in Skid Row and like where they were allowed to go. And so there was this buffer of Skid Row from the rest of downtown Los Angeles. Even like the street signs and the crosswalks were different. If you were in Skid Row compared to the other side of downtown LA, there were more police at the borders, etc.
And to think that that's an American city in the heart of Los Angeles, just blocks away from the finance capital of Los Angeles, you see this is horrific. And it's something that we should all, as a nation, be ashamed of, that we've allowed the policies to exist to create this sort of environment in the middle of our city.
We had a huge issue in the late 1990s, early 2000s, of other cities sending their homeless populations into Los Angeles. People being dropped off on a Greyhound with a one-way ticket, just dropped into the middle of Skid Row in the middle of the night, not knowing what to do.
When I was 18, I kind of like ran away from home. I was on Skid Row for a long time until like last year. And I say drugs and just struggling itself, gang members, you know, being bullied and stuff like that. Compared to Skid Row, this is actually paradise. I mean, yeah, the noise is pretty a headache, but it's better than screams.
So the story of homelessness in Los Angeles is entirely interwoven into the story of Skid Row. And right now what we're seeing is Skid Row broke containment. We no longer can hide from it.
It just blew its containment, gone from Skid Row, or maybe part of the riverbeds. In some places they're out of sight, out of mind. So now it's everywhere, ubiquitous. And it is all preventable, and this lays squarely on the shoulders of our leadership.
Everybody's been able to point fingers at everybody else. The city points fingers at the county points fingers at the city, we point fingers at the state, they point fingers at us. We got to get beyond this.
Well, the city of LA created this problem.
We're in the business of saving lives. Politicians, unfortunately, they're in the business of saving their reputations, and that's their first and foremost their concern, not the death and decay that's happening on the streets every day.
If I was an elected official in this city or county, I could not sleep at night knowing what's happening on the streets of my district.
I think you've had 4 decades of failure, and I think most politicians ran away from this. I won't take blame for homelessness. That is way beyond Eric Garcetti, and I'm very proud of the work that I've done as a council member and as mayor.
Eric Garcetti's trying to make the argument that homelessness is bigger than any one person and bigger than any one job, and as the mayor of Los Angeles, he can only do so much. That is, in some ways, true. This is not entirely his fault, and one person shouldn't be to blame. But as the mayor of Los Angeles, you're not exactly a casual observer.
I do as an Angelino in the same way that we all do, but we collectively, we said no to building more housing. We said we want to preserve the zoning the way it was, redlining years ago, the getting rid of the mental health care system.
I think that is Garcetti's legacy, and it should be in the first line of his obituary. the man who allowed Los Angeles to become a cesspool.
I think the more finger pointing we do, the less work is being done, right? If we're sitting around blaming other people for what the problem is, we're not fixing the problem.
It's a moral crisis in our city. Because of inequity in the system, because of injustice in the system, we have pushed the marginalized onto the streets. Because of an incredible rise in housing prices and the cost of living, we're pushing those at the bottom of our economic structure onto the streets.
In the late aughts, we saw the financial crisis. And when that occurred, we saw like a really big boom in the unhoused population. And so when you couple this economic crisis with now the pandemic and the lack of services and the lack of infrastructure that's been built within Los Angeles County, we're seeing levels that we have never seen before.
We've taken a completely wrong approach to just about everything in the way that we've addressed homelessness. Could we have done any worse? Right? I mean, if we had intentionally tried to do worse.
Part of it is our policies when it comes to mental health, our policies when it comes to addiction, our policies when it comes to crime, our policies when it comes to trying to be compassionate. Maybe that has backfired on us.
What we tend to forget when we address homelessness, we tend to forget homeless people did not drop down out the sky or grow up from the sidewalk. Homeless people came from our society.
not a bum. You know what I mean? I've tried to work and everything like that, but because of my disability, I can't work. I want a house just like everybody else. I want a home.
A lot of people think that the face of homelessness is somebody that's drug addicted or mentally challenged because that's what they see in front of them on the street. But there are so many other people who are homeless who you don't see, either because they're in a shelter or because they're ashamed to ask for help.
I look at homelessness on a continuum. I look at it from being acute to chronic. Acute homelessness, you just lost your job, you lost your place to live, you're in a hotel. Chronic, You're out in the streets and you're talking to yourself, you're having delusions, things like that.
You know, these are all real people that have had lives, that have had jobs, that have had marriages, that have had divorces, they've had hard times. They're not there because that was their first choice. This is their last choice, but they've become used to it, and it's a life that they can deal with. And maybe it's too painful to confront, you know, their families or their past problems. How did you get into homelessness originally?
My spouse passed away, and we lost our condo in foreclosure.
They have personalities, they have lives, they have loves. And in many cases, they have each other.
No story is the same. It could be a little old lady who's been abandoned by her family. It could be somebody who's gone through a brutal divorce and trying to recover.
I went to jail, got divorced. My wife left me, lost my job, lost everything. To me, I just came out here pretty much to self-destruct.
It could be two parents during the Great Recession.
2008, I had a construction company, and the economy just hit, and that was the first trade that they hit.
Our situation was due to financial strain, not to drug addiction, not to alcoholic addiction, not to lack of education or effort, but to the fact that we were struggling in terms of having enough finances to pay for a roof over our head.
There are those with drug addiction, with a criminal record, with the mental health issues. We've all seen them. There's also the mother who lost her job, who's in a domestic violence situation and just had to get out, living in the car with the kids.
Just went through domestic violence, stayed too long, eventually was like, yo, this is not the life I want for my kids. I never want my daughter to feel like it's okay to be hit, and I never want my boys to feel like it's okay to hit. So it's time to leave. And I left. And that then left me homeless and at risk.
Being a female out here alone, if you guys only knew what we go through. I got stabbed by a man in my own spot. I've gotten raped out here.
We're all focused on the visible homeless out there, when in actuality, the overwhelming population of the homeless are the invisible homeless.
I think of the young man from foster care who was couch surfing. That's homeless. I think of the young girl from foster care who was living in her car and she'd shower at the Y each day.
The foster youth, unfortunately, represents a large portion of the homeless population. And because of the lack of services, our wraparound services of when these individuals turn 18, we start to see like a really big increase by the age of 21 of these individuals living on the streets.
When you're in foster care, you're often bouncing around from home to home. So already you lack stability. You perhaps have lost touch with birth family, and then if you have lost time in school, you're behind in your education, how must you feel about yourself? And so we expect these kids to emancipate from the system and say, here you go, world, have at it.
It's so hard when you get out of that system and you're looking for like the resources or the support, and you're going to people who've never experienced these things. They can't relate. They're like, well, why don't you just do this? Or why don't you just, it's not that easy.
Of all the people experiencing homelessness, African Americans are disproportionately represented.
You know where the black community in LA is now? It used to be Leimert Park. You know where it is now? Skid Row.
Well, let's look at the history of the African American population in LA alone. We've all heard of redlining, or lack of ability to get a home loan, or lack of services, or mass incarceration. If you have generations of families without a father in the home, or an ability to climb the ladder of your career, then you're going to have systemic problems.
What would you tell people about life as a homeless man?
It ain't fun out here. Don't trust anybody. I don't know. I don't want to be homeless anymore, that's for sure.
Based on the history of black folks in America coming out of Jim Crowism, 99 years of that, and then out of 245 years of chattel slavery, and all it has generational effects. Black homelessness manifested as a consequence of systemic racism.
You can't deny racial inequity or institutional bias in our country when you see homelessness disproportionately affects people of color. It also disproportionately affects the elderly.
When you turn a certain age in life, they start putting you in a box, and those jobs for older people that you could count on, they didn't deal with that anymore. It's more or less for the young people. And my husband is a veteran, and he worked hard for what he does and how he does it, but things didn't work out that way.
When we think about all the ways people can enter homelessness, oftentimes what we see is that our system has failed. Not the homeless services system, because we catch them when they get here, but the other social safety nets have failed.
There are all sorts of individual stories for homelessness, which is why it's impossible to have one giant solution to homelessness, because homelessness is a collection of 40,000 individual problems in Los Angeles and 70,000 individual problems in Los Angeles County and 150,000 problems in the state of California. Every story is unique.
There's multiple factors that causes a person to be homeless. And until we actually address those factors, homelessness will remain. But the one thing that we can fix in the short term is the permanent housing situation. And that's one thing that we do need to focus on.
We can't talk about the homeless crisis without talking about affordable housing in LA.
We live in a city that is very expensive. The cost of an average one-bedroom is $2,200. Making minimum wage, you can't afford to live here.
We don't have enough housing to support our population and enough affordable housing.
In Los Angeles alone, it's estimated that we need over 500,000 new homes over the next 10 years. In California, I think it's 3.5 million. So we have not been building at a pace to meet the demand. And affordability is truly a factor.
Almost every person in Southern California believes in the concept that we should try to house the homeless. And almost none of those people want to house the homeless next to them.
Nothing frustrates me more than having someone say, you need to fix this problem in my community. And then when we work with that community to fix it, they say, wait, we didn't mean to do it in our community. Move them over there. We as society have to accept the fact that if you want to fix it, it's going to mean in your community. Someone said to me, ship them up to the Antelope Valley, and my head almost exploded. Unacceptable and not going to happen.
Yeah, no, these people here.
There's way too many people that don't have a house or whatever. And there's nowhere to go.
You have a lot of disputes, even within the activist circles, of should the focus be short-term housing or should the focus be long-term housing? The data shows that permanent housing is the best. Getting them in permanent housing can connect them to services, they can live a better life, but also the realization that these communities need short-term housing just to get them off the streets. And that's the big battle of LA right now.
Housing is definitely a need, but along with that housing, there should be a sense of supportive services.
Do you know about the various services that are available to people who don't have houses? When you talk to people about the social services available to them, some people will tell you that they take advantage of them. They need those services. They wouldn't get them any other way.
It's definitely a sense of stability and being able to just feel relaxed, feel like you have somewhere to come home to shower, to eat, to like just lay your head down. Like, sleeping in a car was not ideal, but I had to make it work. For 2 years, I'm like, nobody wants to go through that.
For some people, they don't want to be bothered. And the standard answer you get from some of those people is, I don't want to do the services. I don't want any kind of housing. I'm fine the way I am. Leave me alone.
When they offered me housing, it wasn't working with, what I had going on. It was like certain schedules, curfews and things of that nature. I couldn't leave at a certain time or I had to be back at a certain time, and it wasn't working with what I had going on with my business.
I would take shelters, but not all shelters allow my dog to go with me. And I'm not leaving him behind. He's the only family I got left.
I didn't think I needed help. I was doing fine. I was all right. I wasn't bothering nobody. And at that point in time, anything that mattered to me was gone anyway.
That is one of the elements that is so tricky when it comes to the unhoused. Many of them, they're comfortable. They don't want to be housed. They don't know how to live housed.
You have folks that are maybe in the building and they're still setting up a tent in the apartment. Because the psych part has affected them to the point that, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be.
But it may be temporary.
You're never going to get the housing for everyone. So what does that mean? Eternal funding. Oh, wow, that's convenient, isn't it? Wow, you're going to be in business for 1,000 years, aren't you? Of course it doesn't have to be housing first. It has to be temporary shelter first, and then treatment. And if the treatment works, and a lot of it doesn't, then these people would end up what? Maybe moving back home, seeing their family, making amends, getting some work.
We have to stop making the perfect the enemy of the good, or at least of the good enough. And also, if you look at more immediate solutions, let's say look at the shed homes. Not perfect, not permanent, but a heck of a lot better than what's happening on our sidewalks and our streets and parks. We're not going to solve it overnight, but we can make it much, much better a lot more quickly.
Do I believe that permanent housing, supportive housing, affordable housing is the answer to end this crisis? Absolutely. But the streets can't be the waiting room for permanent housing, any more than if I had hypothermia that you would say, Ken, wait in the snow until the doctor can see you. No, we must bring people indoors.
Our mission is to both prevent and end people's homelessness. This is a place where people can come, they can get off the streets, they can get stable, and then we can assist them in ending their homelessness and moving into permanent supportive housing.
We have 1,532 beds, 23 3 site locations, and we're committed to doing anything and everything we possibly can to address the humanitarian crisis of homelessness.
All of our shelters operate very similarly. So we have 3 meals a day delivered on site. On top of that, we have hygiene facilities, laundry facilities, case management, and housing navigation, which is the critical piece because it's so hard to get an apartment in Los Angeles.
We've identified roughly 7,000 hotel rooms that are now in our possession.
Project Room Key is a program that was established out of the coronavirus pandemic. It was the governor's way of helping the unhoused get shelter during the most uncertain time.
Because of COVID, everybody stopped traveling. So there's basically no need for hotels. So you got all these empty hotels, all these empty motels.
It provided shelter to the unhoused. It took unused hotel rooms or hotel rooms that now were going to be converted into this program to give the unhoused a place to stay.
The transition out of the pandemic is getting people out of the hotels and motels into something that's more permanent housing that they can live in. So a big part of the transition is trying to build housing units for people, but that takes time.
Hopefully, I'll have my Section 8 voucher and get my apartment and I'll go back to work. That's what I plan to do. I work my whole life, so I don't plan on not working. It's kind of hard to hold a job and be out here at the same time.
In 2016, the voters overwhelmingly approved a bond measure for $1.2 billion to create 10,000 permanent supportive housing units for those experiencing homelessness.
I urge all Angelenos to vote for Measure HHH.
When voters said yes overwhelmingly, what we knew is that they wanted to be part of the solution. They were willing to actually pay some of their own money to be part of that solution.
This was intended as part of the answer, not to end homelessness for everyone experiencing homelessness, but to make a significant investment.
Is it the first investment or is it the last investment? Oftentimes, as happens with public bonds, people get the perception they're helping. Down the road, they say, What happened? Where did the money go?
Even the idea of 10,000 units, when you had at that time 50,000 people devastated by homelessness on the streets of LA County, was wrong thinking, right? 10,000 units does not solve homelessness for 50,000 people.
Nobody ever expected that they would be done in a day, but it is now 6 years later, and of those 10,000 units, we've got a little bit more than 1,000 of them completed.
Can you imagine being an outreach worker and going to an encampment and saying, listen, I've got great news for you. We've just passed a bond measure. We're going to create affordable and permanent supportive housing to help you. Just hang in there for the next 4 years.
Too slow, too expensive, too bureaucratic. It is taking 3 to 6 years to get these projects approved, often because there are up to 7 or more sources of funding.
So each unit has a layered cake of different funding streams, from the state, federal government, through tax credits, some of them from philanthropy. Each one of those funding streams have different priorities, have different expectations, different timelines.
When you have a lot of regulation on top of regulation and rules on top of rules, it takes more time and costs more money. And look, I'm all for reasonable regulation. It's a good thing, but this is way too much of a good thing.
I think we need to look at policy shifts so that we can streamline costs for affordable housing, such as permitting fees. Is there a way to maybe reduce those costs for affordable housing developers, particularly nonprofit housing developers? Really streamline the way that we can get to the finish line with affordable housing.
There's nothing wrong with Triple H as an initiative. What complicated it and what has driven up those costs is how it was implemented.
The ones that were supposed to cost $375,000 a unit, they're now averaging $600,000 a unit, some $700,000, and we're projecting one of those projects is actually going to be almost $840,000. Of that, the city kicks in about $140,000.
That's how much it costs to build an apartment in Los Angeles these days.
Out of all of our developments, we have 3 that have received funding from Triple H. The site I'm sitting at today, we actually revitalized all of the sidewalks, redid a lot of the transit lanes in order to make it better, not just for our tenants, but actually for everyone who works and lives, within the vicinity. And that's not uncommon.
HHH is delivering 1,000 more units 2 years earlier for $15,000 less than we promised. You can look at the total cost, and remember, that's not the cost of a housing unit. These buildings oftentimes have a mental health care component. They have facilities that a normal apartment building wouldn't do, and if you divide that into the cost of housing, it sounds like the unit is more expensive than it is.
Nobody asked for $837,000 per apartment, and they know that. The first time somebody would have proposed $837,000, that guy should have been thrown out a window. Of course you don't do that with tax money. That's crazy.
I feel like sometimes people in government become so insulated they don't realize the cost of gas, the cost of groceries. When we make a decision, someone's going to pay for it.
I think if the voters were told that there's no limitation on how much a unit could cost, and most of them would be built in the second half of the 10 years, not the first half, I think most voters would have thought twice before supporting it.
It's been something of a perfect storm in so many ways, between COVID and supply chain problems and inflation and regulation and all of these things. I think if it was really expensive and we were achieving great results, then people might not be as upset about it. But it's really expensive and we're not achieving the results that we need to get.
Imagine what we could have done if we'd have taken that same amount of money and built $60,000 mobile homes. You can build a container home for $100,000. Or I know you could do a 3D printed concrete printed home with a bathroom and a kitchen in 24 to 48 hours for $82,000. Imagine what we could have accomplished if we would have spent the money innovatively, affordably, and taken a whole different approach.
There are certain restrictions in Triple H because it's a housing bond, and so you actually can't use it for something that's not permanent. So a mobile home is not eligible for that kind of funding. It has to be a bricks and mortar structure.
That money, even the cost of one unit, could literally fund a residential program, a group of professionals for a year. That's where that money should be going.
Measure HHH is raising $1 billion for this issue. The City of Los Angeles budget this year alone is $1 billion. The State of California budget is $12 billion. That's expected to go up next year, and yet the problem continues to get worse.
In LA, they spent $6.5 billion on the homeless from 2011 to 2021, and it doubled in size. $6.5 billion to see the problem double in size.
I hope that the takeaway is not that we never want to help again.
I think that it takes dollars. I don't know whether it needs to come from the federal government, the state government, the local government, but that investment needs to be ongoing and continual.
To say that we're spending a lot of money and it doesn't seem to be doing anything, I think is false, because we don't know where we would have been if Triple H had not been passed in 2016. We could be seeing thousands and thousands more people out on our street languishing. So we have to look at that investment as really a stepping stone to what's further needed, which is an ongoing funding source dedicated to this crisis.
The 4 walls, great, I'm all for it. They need it for sure, get them off the streets. But if they get there and don't get proper care, they're going to die anyway. To me, anyone who clings to the notion and the rhetoric around housing as the solution to homelessness is, I consider that manslaughter.
I'm here mainly because I had things in my own life that were out of control, and unfortunately I didn't get the help that I needed quick enough. I think some of us, we fall down in the cracks right? And I think when you get so far removed from certain systems, like when you lose absolutely everything, it really astonished me like how off the grid I became to the world and how hard it became to solve any of my problems.
We have an open-air mental asylum right now that is destroying LA.
The number of people on the street suffering from mental illness is far greater than anyone realizes. And which came first, chicken or the egg? Did they decompensate because they're on the street? Or in fact, did they end up on the street because they weren't properly getting the care they needed?
You can't stay sane, sober, or safe on the streets.
These are serious, progressive illnesses. They are progressive, and they often end in death. And so anything other than attempting to interrupt and treat that is moving somebody in a horrible direction.
I think it's really important to realize that homelessness is a traumatic event, that even if you weren't a drug addict before, becoming homeless can change you, and it changes you physiologically.
And the psychoses on the street are due to primarily three things: bipolar disorder, schizophrenia of various type, and methamphetamine. And methamphetamine bleeds over to the other two as well. The kind of meth that is being brought to us through Mexico right now is of a new variety, and it induces psychosis very quickly.
Potent drugs are dirt cheap on the street. I have special compassion for those with addiction issues. My own brother died of a drug overdose. To see somebody turn to drugs to mask pain, to mask heartbreak, is really what I saw with my own brother.
We're enabling dependency and we're normalizing deviancy. We got to end everything that does that.
The way I think about it is Prop 47, Prop 57, AB 109, that just tells my patients, the drug addicts, that you can come here and support your habit. Enjoy. There'll be no consequences, and you can steal to support it, and it's on. It's on. And that's how you kill drug addicts. Good job, everybody. The federal government had always distributed the care of the mentally ill to the states. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives them that right to take care of the mentally ill. So things were done at the state level.
In the 1960s, we had a lot of mental institutions in California that were not very good and that were seen as depriving people of their rights. And it got so bad, and people were so outraged of basically locking somebody up and throwing away the keys, that we made a lot of that illegal.
With respect to mental illness, our chief aim is to get people out of state custodial institutions and back into their communities and homes without hardship or danger.
President Kennedy, the last signature he put to a document before he went to his fateful trip to Dallas was the Community Mental Health Act, which created the circumstances to completely destroy the state mental health system in the name of community mental health centers. The stated mission of the community mental health centers was to prevent mental illness, not treat it, prevent mental illness. And no provisions were made for all the patients coming out of the state hospitals. Hundreds of thousands of people with very serious mental illness were disgorged to the streets, the nursing homes, and the prisons. They belong in none of these places. They were an abject failure, and they were finally closed by President Reagan in the 80s. That's where this notion that President Reagan closed the hospitals. He did not. It was President Kennedy, and then finally Reagan put an end to the Community Mental Health Act.
When I hear this thing about Reagan closed the mental hospitals, he was done being governor in 1975. He's been dead for almost 20 years. You've got to be kidding me. This has been an entirely run Democratic city and Democratic state for most of the last 20 years. They're in charge.
There was concern that there was overreach, particularly on the part of American psychiatry. The psychiatrists were too at their liberty to hold people against their will, put them in psychiatric hospitals. There were ample evidence of excesses. It was egregious. Lanterman Petra Short ran all the way in the other direction, where you could not be held against your will unless you wanted to kill yourself, kill somebody else, or had something called gravely disabled.
Right now, you could put somebody in what's called a 5150 hold, which takes them off the streets for a couple days, and then they're back on the streets doing the same thing.
What happens after 3 days? Are we magically going to solve a chronic mental illness in 3 days? It takes weeks or months to get somebody clear enough that they start to realize what's been happening to them.
I would argue that with meth and with crack, the impact that's had on individuals' brains have really created a whole different dynamic as it relates to the mentally ill.
This is a long process. Brain disorders take a long time to treat. And then they will look back and go, oh my God, who left me on the street like that? What were you thinking? Why didn't somebody help me? You see how upset I get. It is, you can't imagine how helpless and frustrating it is. You take an oath to help people. I have a skill set where I can specifically help this population and possibly restore them to a flourishing life. And you're told, just walk over these people, walk by, don't help.
I need to change Latimer and Petra's Short Act to expand what constitutes gravely disabled. We just need to have the capacity to involuntarily commit people. It should be more than just a pop singer with a multi-million-dollar bank account that can be under conservatorship. It should be the person dying on the street corner. Is their lives valued less because they're not a pop singer?
The worst thing we can do is to criminalize poverty, to criminalize homelessness, to criminalize mental illness. And we also know that it's not a solution to just say, get off the sidewalk. We have to find a right balance so that we can help as many people as we possibly can.
Do not criminalize these people and do not force hospitalization, but you can't allow the disease to progress without doing something to move that person in the right direction. There needs to be large residential psychiatric facilities built, large, that have step-down services. There need to be care courts with assisted outpatient treatment. We need a systematic structure to get people well off the streets and out into the world.
We need to build capacity. Gone are the days of one flew over the cuckoo's nest. We have advanced science that will allow us to stabilize, but we need the beds in order to get these people the treatment.
How hard is it to open up a mental health center? How hard is it to open up a drug treatment center? Just build the building, buy the equipment, staff the people. They don't do it. We know what to do. They just refuse to get up in the morning and do it.
What got us here is literally politicians that have ascribed to the woke ideology that we cannot address homelessness and we cannot regulate public space. So they can park anywhere they want, do whatever they want with no consequences. And if we do anything, well, we lack compassion, or we're racist, or we're going to criminalize poverty, all these buzzwords. It's political will.
This problem is not for a lack of hard work, of smart people working on it, of money, of dedication, of compassion. Yet it's still there because there's no urgency.
The social services, the politicians, they are addicted to the drug of helping the homeless because it creates money, it creates political power. They can't help it.
I mean, look, you can pick Hollywood, the subway system, Venice, downtown LA. You can pick any specific area and clean it up if you have the political will, the motivation, the housing available, even if it's temporary. I mean, that's what happened in Echo Park. That's what happened in Venice.
It's what you saw at the VA. For years, ground zero of the national embarrassment when it comes to veterans and homelessness was the VA, this massive, sprawling campus in the middle of West Los Angeles, where there were all these homeless people lined up on the street outside, not even able to get in on the campus and get any help. For years, this problem festered, so much so that people started handing out tents with American flags, and there's this lineup of American flags on the street, and then the government not really helping these people.
I agree that this is completely unacceptable. That's why I'm here.
When the Veterans Affairs Secretary from Washington came to see it for himself, then something was done when LA County Sheriff Alex Villanueva made it a point to visit that sidewalk encampment when he had his deputies out there at least once a week. Then all of a sudden, they said, okay, we really need to tackle this issue. And my goodness, overnight, the camp was cleaned up.
In the span of like a month and a half, they're all gone. It's like they were able to clean it up. And part of the way they were able to do that was opening up a tiny home village on the grounds there.
Those unhoused veterans, people who served our country, they were given shelter on the property, literally feet from where they had been camped out for years.
What you saw at the VA shows that if there's a political will, things can get done. You can cut through the red tape if you've got the right people saying, this needs to stop.
It's the same thing that we saw happen in Venice along the Venice Boardwalk. When people in power, in leadership, want to get something done, they can. That's what they proved.
In Venice alone, they have 340 businesses. They employ 10,000 employees. And they're the #2 tourist destination all of Southern California.
Yo, Alex!
When we got there, it was exactly as everyone said. People acting strangely. There was a dearth of tourists. Most of the shops were boarded up, and there was wall-to-wall tents covering the entire Strand. You could not see the beach, the water, from the boardwalk, and the overwhelming smell wasn't salty air, but urine and human waste.
I'm here. I've been here quite a bit. I just don't call the press when I do it.
We saw the sheriff wanting to do something to clean up the Venice Boardwalk, an area that's actually overseen by the LA City Council as opposed to the County Board of Supervisors. It became kind of a political tug of war there over who's going to make this place clean and safe again.
Councilman Mike Bonin says, well, all this was in the works and that he came in at the last minute and was grandstanding.
The reality is that this program was in the works before the sheriff ever sort of stepped onto Instagram and started saying Venice.
But the perception is, and the reality is, that the situation changed dramatically after he got involved. So I'm not saying Sheriff Villanueva is a model for every elected official because he does some things that are very controversial, but he's at least created a sense of urgency and got people talking and got people moving.
I was elected sheriff of the entire county, not just parts of the county. And if local government is refusing to address something that has reached crisis level that's jeopardizing people's lives, I have actually a legal, fiscal, and moral obligation to intercede to change it. And that's exactly what we did in Venice. And we're going to continue doing that everywhere.
Whatever you think of Sheriff Villanueva, he's a pretty shrewd politician. And he understands that issue #1 is homelessness. He thinks that if he can be the one someone to take on the establishment, to say what they're doing is wrong, and I'm literally here as a new sheriff in town to clean it up, that's both smart policy and smart politics. His critics would say all of this is just a show for his own political career.
Our homeless outreach service team went to the boardwalk, started doing the outreach, doing the assessments, and start lining up people with shelter. That's not a stunt. That's actually being compassionate, addressing a crisis. And if local politicians feel nervous and want to call it a stunt, I'd say no, what are you doing about it? And the fact is, our host team, 0 arrests, 0 uses of force, and we've housed tens of thousands of people over the last 6 to 8 years. Those are results.
I don't believe in dismantling encampments, because if you scatter them, they're going to go back into the inner parts of the communities and become a worse problem. Now that we have them here, we have a captive audience. Let us cultivate this into a positive movement, and they will gladly leave the beach once we show them there is somewhere for them to go as a community.
In Venice, the boardwalk's now clear, but if you just go a couple of blocks in, the homeless crisis is still there in the city of Venice itself, but it's just not where all the tourists tend to go.
When I see the encampment cleanups, I see a strategy that has failed us for over 100 years, being replayed over and over again, even dating back to like the Hooverville cleanups. And I think that within those encampments, you have a community of people that are ready to kind of help each other. And you have to utilize the resources of those communities to build something out of it.
No doubt there's an acknowledgement in the political circles that homelessness is issue #1 and that something needs to be done.
The will is growing. The challenge is will to do what?
Channel 11 reporter Hal Eisner spent all of last night and today in Tent City, attempting to better understand the issues that have been raised, the passions beneath them. Hal?
Back in the 1980s, there was a great big tent put out on the lawn of City Hall. And there, the homeless could sleep under the tent, There was food for them to have a nice Christmas dinner. And my assignment was to go there and sleep in that tent and to experience what it was like to spend a night being homeless.
Downtown Los Angeles is a bitter, cold place to sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning.
And as the night grew on, the temperature dropped and it got colder and colder. I couldn't stay in that tent any longer. I had to go out to my car, I had to turn on the engine, kick up the heat, because I was freezing. It was an eye-opener for me. If I had to sleep on a sidewalk all night long, I never would have survived.
I can't even begin to imagine what it would be like, even if I had to spend a week on the street. If any of us had to, what would that do to our psyche? What would that do to our sense of self?
You mentioned that the homeless are growing, except there's always been a homeless problem.
Homeless is certainly nothing new. I think perhaps Los Angeles, we have been told, is almost like the capital of the homeless in the United States, and maybe that just draws more attention to it.
This issue touches nearly every portion of Los Angeles, or just in every city, that there are families that you are not necessarily aware of that are struggling. We've learned to not talk about it in public, or only talk about it amongst ourselves. And so a lot of these larger issues that have impacted these families or communities are never really fully addressed.
It could be any one of us. Any one of us, without the right family support, could face homelessness.
I come from a dysfunctional household. Single parent, no father around, lots of abuse, alcoholism. I was born into that. I never had any money as I grew up. When I was 9, me and my sister saw my mom laying on the floor. She got shot in the head.
I grew up in a situation where we lost our house at when I was in 7th grade, and so we suffered from housing insecurity for a number of years. It was when I was younger, right? And so I think that it impacts you. You realize how the places that you used to call home or feel safe no longer feel safe. You realize that there's not really anything to really catch you.
So my father was a meth addict and was homeless on the streets of San Francisco for about 2 years. I've actually never talked about this publicly. I wasn't sure about doing it, but I asked him, Dad, is it okay if I talk about your homeless phase and your addiction? And he said, absolutely. And he said so with some gusto because he knows that sharing his story can help others.
When I graduated from high school, my father became estranged from the family. I didn't talk to him for over 5 to 6 years. And the next time I found him, I realized he was living on the streets of Skid Row.
When I left my family in 1985 to live with the homeless, to become homeless on purpose, I had 4 children, 4 little kids, 9, I think, 11, 13, 12, 13. And you're talking about trauma, talking about pain.
I ran away from home at 14, and I was homeless for the next 23 years after that. I spent most of the 90s in and out of jails. I would get out, commit a crime, go back to jail, get out, commit a crime, go back to jail. I lived in some abandoned houses, attempted to get a job, but that didn't work out because it's embarrassing trying to work when you haven't had a shower.
He wanted to chase his next high. It didn't matter that he had lost his family, that he had lost me as a daughter and his son, my brother, and his wife, my mother. It didn't matter. That's how addiction ruins lives. He lost his family, he lost his house. He was a barber, he had a barber shop, he lost that. It's one thing after the other, and it didn't matter anymore because he was so far down that addiction path that he was okay with being homeless.
I didn't see myself as really being homeless. I didn't even call myself homeless. I was just out living life. My daily routine, I'd come to wherever I pass out, how I could get high or get drunk, raise some money until I got arrested.
When I got my license, I'd always wanted to go find my father. I made it my mission to drive to the city of Pacifica where I had heard that my dad lived, and I made the trip down by myself, and I found him, but what I found wasn't what I wanted to see. He wasn't sober, let me just put it to you that way. I spent some time with him. I remember we took a picture together. I have that picture. I look at it, it crushes me because I'm smiling in the picture, but internally I remember what I felt like that day. I was so devastated, and I just couldn't wait to get home.
I hurt my family. I severely hurt my family. And it's taken decades to heal. And now, after years of talking and working together, they finally now understand, and they're glad I did what I did, actually. They've said that to me. I had to feel it, smell it, taste it, go through what they go through, harassment from the police, the weather, sleeping on the sidewalk, urinating and defecating in the streets and the alleys. I had to go through that. I went through that with the understanding that I have to do this because someday, should I ever get the opportunity to tell or speak to the world about homelessness, I will do it not from an intellectual study data as you normally hear, but I will speak to the world from my heart.
When I was out being homeless, I tried to go to school and I couldn't get it completed. Some years later, in this universe, I'm able to be an instructor at this same school.
He did have some stints in jail as well. He was court ordered to rehab, and it worked. It worked for him, and that's a miracle. It is a miracle, and there's a lot of hurt in the family because of it, but I am so proud that he leads a clean life now, and he does give back to those who struggle with addiction and those who are on the streets, and that makes me a very proud daughter.
All of a sudden, I'm an author and I'm a practicing clinician. I came in and I want people to understand that anything's possible. No matter how far down you go, you can make it back.
Why am I here? Mom kicked me out, so I've been on the streets for at least 7 years. I am waiting my turn Because, I mean, there's a lot of people out here on the streets, a lot of them. And some of them do need it more than I do. I'm willing to wait my turn.
This situation didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to be fixed overnight.
Nobody deserves to live on the streets of Los Angeles. And we must do anything and everything we possibly can to help our brothers and sisters.
We need to work on affordable housing in America, and that will not fix this issue, but it will severely curb how many people are unhoused.
We have to say yes to housing in our backyard. We have to say yes to building at a quicker pace. We need units that are dedicated towards individuals who are homeless, as well as those for people who are at risk.
I just got my Section 8. I need the amenities, you know? I need stuff in the building for me.
A lot better than being by the noisy freeway.
Can't wait. I already got a flat screen TV I'm gonna bring in. It's pretty cool. I'm already getting ready for it, you know?
Excited.
Yeah, pretty much excited, yeah. I can't wait. I put my dues in out here, you know? I put my time in out here. I'm done.
Once we bring them in, show them unconditional love and grace and hope, we can begin to rebuild their lives.
It's about providing them the mental health services, the substance abuse services that they may need, and the vast majority of them do need.
We have the capability to do this. We need the political will to actually execute on the plan. And I think that's what's been missing.
If you waved the magic wand tomorrow and got rid of homelessness, all these nonprofits, they'd all be out of business. What would politicians run on? They use this to guilt people to raise taxes. I mean, how many times do you have to have your wallet stolen?
So we have some really dumb decisions that politicians have made that need to be changed, and they need to change their ways. They need to get out of being elected officials because they're harming the community they're supposed to represent.
What we also have, unfortunately, is a real dysfunction in terms of how the city and the county interrelate.
There's not a cohesive strategy. There's no central agency, no homeless czar that says, this is our plan for the city, for the county, for the state.
There is no real accountability and review of what's working and what's not. Where do we need to pivot? What are we doing right? So the Blue Ribbon Commission was formed and said you need to have one point of contact, someone that's really going to be that fearless leader that's going to be the hammer, that's going to say this is what needs to be done and here's how we're going to do it.
There has been such a lack of communication for so long in regards to the actual homeless population, the people speaking for them, and the people who are making the laws. And because the people who actually know what they want are the homeless populations.
People who have walked and experienced homelessness should be at the table with the decision makers who are making the decisions around this homeless crisis. Because who better to tackle this than someone who has walked and lived it?
Right now, for every person that we place in permanent supportive housing, more than one person becomes homeless. Right at this moment, we're losing the war.
If the mayor of Los Angeles declared a state of emergency on homelessness temporarily, they would increase the power of the mayor's office, take power away from the city council to build, to permit, to put in different projects in place, and it would hopefully cut through some of the red tape. Problem is, if a mayor declared a state of emergency, every 2 weeks the city council would have to vote to continue to give the mayor those emergency powers. Why would the city council vote every 2 weeks to take away their greatest powers and give it to somebody else?
LA can't do this alone without every other city in this county and 4 other counties doing it together. We can't do it without a state and without our federal government.
I don't know if the federal government is capable of doing it. It's the same breed of government workers and bureaucrats and bumbling, lying officials. I mean, they're all the same. They're just in different levels.
If there was an earthquake tonight, and we had 70,000 people that were in red tag building and that were homeless and displaced on the streets, the National Guard would be here within minutes and make sure that there's adequate facilities set up. The Red Cross would be here. It's time that we treat this, the crisis that it really is, with an emergency response, getting people off the streets, addressing the issues, and building the infrastructure and the resources to make sure that we can finish strong.
The first step is calling the state and calling the federal government and send me the people and send me the supplies to build these massive shelters, these instant shelters that FEMA or the military would use. Give them bunks, give them food and water, just do it.
I have no problem with using FEMA, but that will not be the beginning of the end of the story. They are not designed to deliver clinical services. They'll be designed to help with some of the emergency of getting people off the street and dealing with their infectious diseases now. But the treatment of the underlying conditions that put people on the street, that's something else, and the state's gonna have to put that together.
If you're gonna resolve it, it has to be done on a national scale. In fact, it has to take a presidential executive order. Otherwise, we're playing whack-a-mole. And where we create a solution, over there we cause the problem.
We can't live in a community where we think it's okay that people can live out on their streets, because we know they're dying out there too. And it really makes me want to strive harder.
I'm the eternal optimist. My sense is that things can get better. When you see all these volunteer organizations, all these people giving of their time, all these people trying to make a difference, that a difference can happen.
It's hard. It's hard.
It is. If it wasn't for him, I don't know what I would do. And I'm thankful to have him.
You love him a lot?
Oh, yes.
You love her a lot?
I do.
Say I do.
I do.
If you have any compassion as a human being, when you look at these people on the street, you can't help but feel, how can we not help them? And allowing them to die on the streets is unacceptable. And we as Californians and we as Americans need to and should and can do better.
We are the city of angels. We are guardians, we are protectors. It is our job to make this space better for everyone around us. And I think that's what we're all being tasked with right now. And hopefully we can step up to the plate and do that job. person's not born homeless. A person eventually gets there, and we're still not spending enough time figuring out how to help that person before they get to that end point.
If we think differently, we could take on homelessness in LA, but we have to reverse course. We can't stay on the same deadly course.
We've got a great crisis here in LA. It's going to take all of us doing something on a regular basis to be part of the solution. These people are our neighbors, our children, somebody's son, mother, daughter, father, who've fallen into crisis. And I don't believe we give up.
Welcome, everyone, to this special live Fox 11 digital post show. I'm Marla Tejas. We certainly hope that you've just seen our new Fox 11 documentary entitled Los Angeles. It was our in-depth look at the problem of homelessness in Los Angeles. The documentary was full of powerful voices, including this man's voice here. We'll talk to him more in a minute. People living currently without homes, those trying to help them, leaders responding to the crisis, and residents' complaints about the unhoused. Ultimately, it's a story about the human cost of living on the streets of LA and what to do about it. And we want to continue this conversation in the digital space, so we thank you for being with us tonight on foxla.com. My guest tonight will add additional perspective to the problem, beginning with Anthony Brown, who is featured in the documentary. You are a success story. You were drug addicted, substance abuse addicted. You were on the streets. You overcame your homelessness. We saw that in the documentary. Thank you for being so open and vulnerable and sharing your story.
Well, thank you for having me.
Also joining the conversation, we have Rachel Kassenbrock, Director of Communications for LA Family Housing. That is a nonprofit helping families and individuals transition out of homelessness. And lastly, joining the conversation tonight is Alex Furtado. He is a member of the LA County Youth Commission, and he himself was once homeless as well. Alex and Rachel and Anthony, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Well, thank you.
Okay, so we just watched.
Thank you so much for having me.
We just watched 90 minutes of this really powerful documentary. I want to get your initial thoughts on it. What struck you the most?
I think seeing how the problem still exists, how many different people are trying to resolve the problem, and yet we're only making small strides and moving forward.
Small strides in moving forward, and how the problem has gotten worse over the years, no matter how much money is thrown at it, certainly. Alex, I'll go to you. Again, I'll remind everybody that you are with the LA County Youth Commission. Alex, what are your initial thoughts on this?
Yeah, my initial thoughts are, I thought the documentary brought up a lot of important issues surrounding homelessness. I'd love to see even more conversations about young people experiencing homelessness, and I'm excited to be a part of this conversation to raise those issues. Additionally, with some youth experiencing homelessness after foster care, there are other big reasons driving youth homelessness. Some youth get kicked out of the house because they're LGBTQ. Some struggle to find housing after incarceration, and still others just can't afford housing in LA County. So those were my takeaways. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And we learned there that the average price to rent a place, a one bedroom, is $2,200 in this county. I know, it's astronomical. All right, Rachel, let's get your thoughts, your initial thoughts on the documentary.
Great. First, well, thank you so much for investing the resources and time into investing and drawing attention to this horrific crisis that we're living through. My first and major takeaway is just that it really shows how much work we have ahead of us. Homelessness is a life-threatening humanitarian disaster. It also really presented the complexity of the issue that we have ahead of us. This isn't a crisis that happened overnight. It is the result of an extreme lack of affordable housing. It is a result of decades of disinvestment in our social safety nets. And it's the result of the continued effects of systemic and institutional racism, which we see in our work every day. It's the result of decades of bad policy, and now it's going to take an all hands on deck approach to fix it.
Rachel, since you have us captivated right now, Let me ask you, what are you hearing from the individuals, from the families that come to your nonprofit? I know you're based in North Hollywood. What are you hearing from them? How did they end up there?
Absolutely. Yeah. So from what we hear at LA Family Housing from the folks we're working with, the first and most significant driver into homelessness for people that we work with is a lack of affordable housing. What causes homelessness varies from person to person. No two stories are the same, but what we hear over and over again is that there was some crisis that took hold. For example, perhaps someone's car broke down and they couldn't afford to get it fixed and still get to work on time. Or, somebody had a grave illness that they needed to then focus on paying the medical bills for rather than affording their monthly rent. Those are all issues that really cascade, and it's a waterfall effect and can quickly lead to homelessness before we realize it. So it really is the result. It can really be anything. Any one of us could experience homelessness. It's not something that happens to just people who are living with mental illness or just people who are living with a substance use disorder. It can happen to anyone. We see people every day who, quote unquote, do everything right, who work full-time jobs to provide for their families. And it's still not enough to afford our exorbitant housing costs here in Los Angeles. So really it's a range of experiences.
How does the LA Family Housing nonprofit then help people who come to see you?
Absolutely. So our mission is to help people transition out of homelessness through a continuum of housing enriched with supportive services. So we're both a developer and a service provider, which really sets us apart in this sector. We provide a full range of services that include connections to mental and physical health care, case management, trauma recovery, employment support, really a full range of services that don't just help transition people out of homelessness, it really helps them to regain personal stability and to thrive. We're also one of the largest affordable housing developers in LA. We currently own and operate 30 properties across LA County of affordable and permanent supportive housing. And we have about 700 additional units in our real estate pipeline to be completed in the coming years. So that's something we're very proud of and excited about, and look forward to being able to continue to make progress moving forward.
Wow, well, thank you for all you do. We'll let you take a breath there. That was a lot. Thank you, Rachel. I'm going to bring it back here in studio to Anthony, who you are the success story. Your story is incredible. You run your own nonprofit. I know yours is based in Orange County, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I'm starting a program in Ohio.
Oh, I am mistaken.
Yes, but
I'm sorry.
That's okay. But
started with an O.
Yeah.
And I wanted to touch on, though, the fact that how important treatment is.
And treatment is very important. You have to figure out how not to continue to do drugs, and that takes a lot. You just don't remain abstinent, because there's always a core. There's a core problem that starts the whole drug addiction thing. The drug addiction is just a solution, but the underlying thing, the childhood trauma, being out there in the streets, all the trauma that goes with it, a lot of ineffective coping skills that you've been utilizing has to be resolved. And so treatment helps you dig into that after you remain abstinent, and then it's an ongoing process that you have to constantly work on.
I told my personal story in the documentary about my father, who was drug addicted and homeless, and he overcame it. In the program, in the rehab program, they're considered miracles. You're a miracle that you overcame the addiction, and it's amazing. What do you think that it is, though? Why is the addiction problem such a problem on the streets?
Well, a lot of it is you have nothing to exchange it for. I believe in substitution. Your addiction is your friend. And once you let go of that friend, then what do you have? And if you don't have something else to replace it with, then you're likely to go back to it again. And so help finding different relationships, bonds, support systems, things like that helps come into play. Then finding something to do to occupy the time so you don't think about drinking and using, that also helps.
Right. Alex, don't worry, I didn't forget about you. I want to hear, because when I introduced you, that I said that you experienced homelessness as well. You're a young man. Share your story with us. How did you overcome that?
Yeah, so I'm 24 years old, and I grew up in the foster care system since I was about 5 years old. I was taken away from my home. And then while I was still in foster care, I was in and out. I was living with the legal guardian, and then as I grew older, I ended up living with my grandmother for a little bit. And then, I graduated high school. I lived with a friend. I went to college. For me, it was either always the military or college. I ended up doing both. I joined the military reserves my sophomore year of college. I ended up going to Georgia. I came back and I became incarcerated for about 14 months. After that, I went to a drug rehabilitation program myself, and then I stayed at this place called an abridged home, which is a temporary shelter in West LA. The two partners are PATH and Safe Place for Youth. And after living there for about 8 months, I began employment with Safe Place for Youth. So the same people that housed me in the shelter, I don't know if they saw something in me or if I was just a leader amongst my peers, or I ended up working for them, and then from there, I started working with the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority and joined the Youth Commission as well.
Wow, what a story you have as well. So in your current role, what is it like to work with youth? You mentioned off the top that you wanted to talk more about the problem among youth and how many people are unhoused, and really the invisible homeless, because we also learned that too within the documentary.
Yeah, so my role at LASA is I'm the Youth Action Board coordinator. So we have a lived experience advisory board, which is more of the adult population who are either homeless or are currently homeless. And then also we have HIFLA, which is the Homeless Youth Forum of Los Angeles. So they provide valuable feedback to basically any policy. And HIFLA's mission is HIFLA works to end youth homelessness in Los Angeles County by centering the voices of youth with lived expertise and decision-making on program development, funding, policy making, and program system performance evaluation. So that's what I do in my role. I basically connect youth, motivate youth, and continue to lift up their input and policy, funding, and program.
Anthony, I want to get your thoughts now on policy and the policies that have remained in place that have allowed this to happen, that people on the streets living in these homeless encampments. And it's not just Skid Row. I mean, that used to be the heart of the homeless problem locally here, but now it's all over. It doesn't matter where you go. And there's so much millions of dollars, so many millions of dollars being thrown at the problem, yet it still exists. Does that frustrate you? How do you reconcile that?
It is frustrating, and there has to be some solution. I know right now, I believe in housing, that's great, but I believe in housing plus. If you're gonna give people a place to live, then give them some sort of support, some sort of treatment, some sort of education. Give them a lot of people in the streets have health issues that we don't look at. I know I was talking to a guy the other day. He said he would go to housing, but he has a double hernia and he's in pain and they won't treat that there. And so we need to broaden what we're doing instead of just saying, okay, well, here's a house and here's a service. We need to follow up with some medical things, some psychological help and things of that nature. So adding more targeted funding would help out a lot. I tend to look at homelessness as a spectrum instead of just acute, where you first hit the streets, or chronic, you've been out there for a long period of time. It's a spectrum. And so people on one end of the spectrum, those that just lost their jobs, or the invisible people that's living on sofas, they may need things like vocational training, stuff like that, opposed to somebody that's been out there that needs more in-depth psychological work and things of that nature. So I think the policy should be more target specific. I think that would help out when it comes to delivering resources and services.
It is such a complex issue. Rachel, let's get your thoughts on that, given all of the money that is out there for the problem of homelessness in LA County, and this is exactly what you do for a living.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would absolutely agree. Housing plus is such a nice way to put it. The single greatest area of need for unhoused Angelenos is housing. Affordable housing. But at LA Family Housing, we're very aware that what we really need to make sure people stay successfully housed are the wraparound services that really enable them to thrive. Again, pieces like substance use disorder support, mental health treatment, employment resources, all of those pieces are really important factors that enable people to thrive long term once they transition out of homelessness. I will say that yes, we've obviously invested quite a bit of money into this issue, and it is working. We're seeing progress. We are putting more housing units online than ever before. It's not enough to stem the tide. However, we really, really need this unprecedented push into building affordable and supportive housing units. And we need to continue to scale that up, find more innovative solutions like our Project Home Key program to really make sure we're bringing enough housing online to actually provide enough units to successfully house the people who are continuing to fall into homelessness. There's a statistic that I always think of. In 2020, on any given night in LA, the homeless count numbers showed that there were about 66,000 people experiencing homelessness. However, 95,000 people fell into homelessness at some point. That's incredibly telling. We've ended homelessness for tens of thousands of people, but it's still not keeping up with the increase in folks who are continuing to fall into homelessness as a result of the affordable housing crisis.
Yeah, we heard in the documentary tonight, LA County Sheriff Alex Villanueva, the homeless count, the last count was 66,000. That's the number you're referring to. He thinks it's much higher. And you used the word, Rachel, unprecedented. That made me think of the pandemic, which was really a once-in-a-lifetime, let's hope, experience, unprecedented. And I want to talk more about how the homeless situation grew worse within the pandemic and how that really changed the face of the crisis itself. So, Rachel, let's just start with you. Throughout the pandemic, what did that look like? How did it change the face of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, right off the bat, we can say that the pandemic disproportionately impacted communities of color and low-income communities who were already, more likely to be working low-paying jobs and more likely to be struggling with financial insecurity. So when it became more difficult to work in person, when we started to see safer at home restrictions go into place, those are the people who are impacted first. So in addition to that, people lost access to their social safety nets. They became more isolated from the people in their lives who could potentially support them. So we basically saw the pandemic exacerbate a lot of pre-existing inequities that we saw play out in a very different way as a result of COVID. So at the same time, there were some silver linings of the pandemic. As weird of a phrase as that is, it brought us Project Home Key, for example, which was a really great example of the city, county, and state very quickly working to move people indoors as quickly as possible. And that resulted in a lot of transitions into permanent housing for people. It's now transitioned into Project Home Key, which is an incredibly successful way to convert a large amount of hotel rooms into permanent homes for a relatively low cost. So I would say that really the pandemic, again, exacerbated a lot of what we had already been seeing in terms of inequities, but it also presented us with a lot of opportunities to really turn that around and start to invest in solutions that we know are effective in ending homelessness.
While you were speaking, Rachel, I was watching Alex and Anthony here, both nodding in agreement. So let's get your thoughts on that. Alex, I'll go to you first. How did, within the youth community and what you experienced, how did the pandemic change homelessness?
I mean, I think the pandemic had a lot of different impacts. I think at first, the pandemic, a lot of people, I think, relied on unemployment, right? I know a few people that did. When that stopped, I think it was very hard for people to go out and find a job. Also, the pandemic, impacted a lot of people to get laid off, fired, different things like that. Some people couldn't afford to keep employees on. I also agree. I think everyone else does as well. When you said the homeless count there's definitely much higher than what it was. And unfortunately, I think after the pandemic, we still need financial assistance. We still need different support. A lot more people ended up homeless because of the pandemic, and that's still concerning.
Anthony?
Yeah, I agree. I see a lot of people did lose their job during the pandemic. A lot of people fell into depression, substance abuse increased, things of that nature, and it's just did make the situation grow. And there wasn't very much relief because a lot of times people wasn't taking other individuals into places because they was worried about spreading the disease. And so it just got to be a mess. One plus out of the pandemic is we increased our telemedicine and telehealth. And so that was one good thing, we was able to reach out to more people. But again, they have to have access to computers and things of that nature. So it had an impact out there.
Yeah, I mean, here we are on Zoom tonight, and I know that you two would have liked to have been in studio, but that just couldn't happen tonight. But yeah, we all learned to sort of navigate in the Zoom world. But then, you know, there are a lot of people who can't even afford Wi-Fi and who were out there unhoused. So there's that, and that gets us back to where we are now. So the homeless crisis, it has ballooned. Where do we go from here, Anthony?
Well, if once someone get out of homelessness, we have to help them stay out of homelessness. Whether we get you involved in enhancing your skills, do whatever we can do to help build up your self-esteem, your self-worth, even your self-concept. I'm big on that. Is who do you think that you are? You will behave that way. And so if we can educate you and get you to have more belief in yourself, whether you go to school, get some things accomplished, whether you get a job and start becoming successful there, all of these little steps to help build up your self-worth, I think that'll help you from going back into where you came out of, and I think that would help resolve some of the problem.
On a personal level, what was your rock bottom? How did you turn your life around? What was that one moment?
I was just tired, and a police officer that continued to arrest me asked me if I wanted some help.
Oh.
And that broke my denial, because I didn't know I had a problem. Even though I was homeless for 23 years, I didn't know I had a problem until he pointed out and said, well, don't you think you want to do something different? I'm like, well, what's wrong with what I'm doing? And he's like, well, you have no place to live, you have no job skills, I'm always arresting you, what are you going to do? I'm like, well, what should I do? And then he goes, well, go in this direction. And then I just continued to do it and had the support from this new life and started going to school, started getting things accomplished, started getting my license, and you know, I kind of like this way.
It's a lot better, isn't it?
It's much better.
It's much better. Was he the first police officer to just offer that question up to you?
I think so. I think so, because most of the time I was so inebriated being out there, I couldn't hear much of anything. And my mentality had morphed into, well, just let me go to jail, because it's better than sleeping on the streets. Until he goes, well, then there has to be something different. And then I'm like, there's something different. And so it broke that whole cycle that I've been conditioned to believe in and allowed me to switch my life around.
How many years has it been?
23 years.
So you were 23 years on the streets and now 23 years
yes.
not?
Yes.
Wow, congratulations.
Well, thank you.
That's just incredible and so inspiring. Alex, where do we go from here in your world and what you do for a living?
You know, in my world, you know, I think the Youth Commission is helping lead the way. You know, we have to ensure the county leadership hears from the youth and the Youth Commission. You know, the Youth Commission is made up of youth, but we look at the youth in different communities who serve the youth for input. You know, youth mental health is also a huge issue too. Foster youth disconnected from their families as well. You know, this is a contribution to young adults being homeless. You know, when we talk about money and funding and how much money we've thrown at the problem, you know, I used to think the same thing, but unfortunately, you know, there's a lot of restrictions, there's a lot of red tape, there's a lot of requests and approvals that need to be made when it comes to funding sources and procurement and different things like that. Less restrictions when it comes to funding. You know, I don't know what else to say, because you know, if we get told we can't spend the money this way and we're trying to spend it in a very very positive way for the homelessness issue, well, then we have to find that funding somewhere. And then if we can't find that funding somewhere, then we don't have that funding. You know, and permanent supportive housing, I think, is a big example of that. You know, I currently just obtained a permanent supportive housing unit. And there's requirements to obtain it. And again, if we're trying to solve the issue, we need to not have requirements or not have as many requirements, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of red tape to get through.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying, somebody should take advantage of the system and we should eliminate all restrictions completely, but definitely lowering them so that way, more people who are on the street, young and old, are able to have a home.
You're just 24 years old. You shared a little bit of your story. When you look back, though, and see where you are now, what do you think, Alex?
Honestly, about a year and a half ago, I was incarcerated in 2018. It's now 2022. I've done things that I never thought I'd do coming out of jail. I'm very proud of it. It's humbled me a lot. I always continue to think about where I come from and who I serve today. I love what I do today. I wouldn't trade it for anything, but I never thought I would see myself doing this. At the end of the day, when I was young, I wanted to be a cop. I wanted to be a police officer because I used to have police officers come in and take me out of my home. And I thought that maybe one day I would be able to relate to somebody in foster care who might be going through the same thing and let them know it's okay and maybe give them something that the cops didn't give me when they were taking me out of my home. But honestly, I think sometimes, life works out the way it's supposed to. And I'm very grateful.
You're another inspiration for youth who may be watching us online right now, Alex, and they need some help. What can you offer them in terms of getting in touch with you or the LA County Youth Commission itself?
Yeah, I could definitely offer them my email and my phone number and different things like that. I can give that now, or I can give that to you.
You don't have to give your personal phone number. Certainly, I don't want you to put that out there. Your phone could be ringing off the hook.
Yeah, no, but definitely, I would go onto the LA County Youth Commission's webpage and I would look at all the different youth commissioners and all of the different districts that they serve. And if you're in a district that your youth commissioner is in, I would reach out to the youth commission and see how you can get connected and maybe how you can give your feedback and input as well. That's the best thing I would suggest. Because we would take these things back to the supervisors.
All right, Alex, thank you so much. And Rachel, where do we go from here?
Thank you. And first, I just really want to acknowledge how honored I am to be on a panel with such incredible people. Alex and Anthony, congratulations, and just really wowed at your resiliency and everything you've accomplished. So just wanted to say that. I agree with everything that's been said. Absolutely, we need to be looking at ways to cut down on the red tape, make it more easy to build more housing more quickly. As an affordable housing developer, LA Family Housing is well aware of many opportunities that we have to streamline and finance more new housing developments in Los Angeles. And we're actively at the table with policymakers, working with them to try to make that happen. We really just need to continue to keep our foot on the gas pedal, acknowledge that the work we're doing is working. We know what it takes to end homelessness. Here we see it happen every day. We really just need to continue to put the pressure on folks to advocate for resources that we know are effective in ending homelessness, more housing, more supportive services, and we will see results. We just need to really continue to push.
I like it. I like the spirit of this conversation, everybody. I want to let everybody online know, direct you to the website that you're watching us on right now. We have established a massive, in-depth companion section to our documentary that aired tonight. It has special features, graphics, and a comprehensive breakdown of the issues and the stakeholders and how the money approved by voters is actually being spent. We're scrolling through it live for you right now. All you need to do is click on the Los Angeles icon button at the top of the homepage for all of this content. I spent a lot of time on this earlier today, and it's really just sort of a history lesson in how did we get here, where's your money going, what is Proposition HHH. You learn, and it also has some resources if you need help, if you want to be part of the solution. There are those aspects to that portion on our website, foxla.com. I think that about wraps up our conversation tonight. Any final thoughts, Anthony?
Just always remember that somebody homeless is someone's relative. And let's not lose sight of that. And let's just continue to, contribute and be supportive of who we see out there.
And what's the name of your organization that you're starting in Ohio?
It's called Brown Manor.
Okay. You know, I have that down here. I don't know why I got the Orange County, so I do know that I wrote down Brown Manor.
Yes,
So
it's Brown
yes, so that will, you're going to pay it forward with that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, Anthony Brown, thank you for being with us tonight. Alex for...
Journalists, of course, the great Christine Devine is interviewed.
And Alex Michelson.
On this complicated topic. We are grateful to the so many people who participated. Also grateful, and this is pretty cool, that legendary actor Edward James Olmos voiced the opening narration. We'll be showing that in just a few seconds from now.
He is an icon here in LA, has seen the growth and seen what's happening. We're all asking the question, what's happening in Los Angeles?